Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat Five segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. Hello. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Guy Licata. While we kept to the traditional format in the first half of our chat, I think the topic of today's episode deserved its own place in the sun. Guy prepared Emmy Award-winning actor Riz Ahmed for his role as a drummer in the Amazon Studios film Sound of Metal. He was tasked with all aspects of the drum set instruction and preparation for the role over a 7-month period. To crudely sum it up, the movie tells the story of Ruben, a touring metal drummer who experiences sudden and permanent hearing loss, and how he has to deal with the life-altering consequences that entails. Anyways, I wanted to hear all about that process and how it most certainly differs from normal instruction. I hope it goes without saying that I recommend you check out Sound of Metal. Riz was nominated for an Oscar for the role, and I think it actually won a few, including sound design. It's an incredible film, and I promise I wouldn't just say that. Unfortunately, there are a few digital dropouts with Guy's audio, but it's not that bad, and I didn't want to edit anything out because everything Guy says matters. So the first bit of audio you're going to hear is a clip from the actual movie where Ruben finds out the severity of his condition for the first time. Then we hop into the chat. All right, cheers.
This is your chart, Ruben. Now, as far as the volume that you can hear, you, on your right ear, were 28%, and on your left ear, you were 24%.
That's what?
On the left ear, you came in at 24%.
Okay.
No matter how loud I made the test, I could have put it at 11. You were still going to miss 70 to 80% of the words that I said.
Okay.
That is not good.
Yeah, I see that. So what what can we do about it? How do I get it back?
Well, you have to understand something here. Whether or not this is related to your exposure to noise or it's an autoimmune issue doesn't really matter.
I understand I got a problem. I'm asking you what I can do about it.
Well, what you can do about it first is to eliminate all exposure to loud noises. And then we can run some tests and we can determine exactly what is going on with your ears. And if we do, then we can have our other conversations.
You can have what?
Well, there are implants that bypass the cochlea.
You said implants?
Yes.
Those work?
People with severe hearing loss or complete deafness, yes, they help.
Well, then let's do that.
Well, it's not that simple. It's a very involved process, and it's quite costly.
How much is it?
Well, they can run between $40,000 and $80,000, depending, and they are not covered by insurance.
Okay. And, like when can you do it? You got them in stock now?
Mr. Stone, your hearing is deteriorating rapidly. Am I right? And over the next few days, or even hours, it's going to continue. And the hearing that you have lost is not coming back. You have to understand, your first responsibility is to preserve the hearing you have.
Yeah, so you prepared Emmy Award-winning actor Riz Ahmed for his role in Sound of Metal. So how did that situation come to fruition?
Okay. And as I mentioned, this is like 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
So, and I've talked about it so much, at the time and through that. But it's funny, like as we talked about in the last episode, the timeline gets fuzzy. So how it started was I got a DM from Adam Betts, who we know and love.
Oh yeah.
And he was basically like, "Hey, I'm training this actor in the UK for a movie role where he's a drummer. they're moving pre-production to the States, New York in particular, so they're not going to bring me over. It's an indie film. So do you teach? And I said, well, yes, I do, in fact. And he told me it was Riz, and I knew him from The Night Of,
Sure.
and a few other things. I was like, oh, this is great. We could talk about Totoro. So Adam so graciously connected me with the producer and director, and we chatted. They had looked me up and for some reason just saw some things of me on YouTube and like, that's the dude. I was like, okay, but let's talk to see if this makes sense. So I met with Darius Martyr, incredible writer, director. This was his first time doing all of it, really. He had worked on A Place Beyond the Pines with Derek Cianfrance, and Derek had also started a doc called Metalhead that was about Jucifer. I don't know if you know that band.
No, I know Pucifer, but that's
a little bit. Yeah, that's guns. So Jucifer, they're known as the loudest band in the world. It's this duo, and so Darius was working with Derek on that, but that kind of eventually, I don't want to say fell to the wayside. It never really materialized, and then Darius asked Derek if he could kind of pick up where that was going conceptually and kind of write a story about it, because he had family members who experienced profound hearing loss later in their lives. So that was a deeply personal thing for him. It took him 10 years to really write this thing and get it made. So I met with Darius. He gave me the initial script. I read through that, and again, it was incredibly emotional. It was just brilliantly written. And after that, I met with his brother, Abraham Martyr, who's a composer, guitar player, multi-instrumentalist, who was going to be handling the music side of things. And we kind of chatted about bits of that. But I was in. And then the process from there was kind of just getting to know, the structure overall of what pre-production was going to look like, when production was, what the timelines were. And I only really had one thing on the books, which was playing in a show in Berlin with Bill Laswell and Laurie Anderson. And I said, this is the boulder in the stream. I can do this. And they said, no problem. We'll be wrapped way ahead of that. I said, cool. From there, at the time, Riz was working in and kind of getting to know another drummer named Sean Powell, who's an incredible drummer. He plays with a band called Surfboard. He's played with a ton of other bands through the years. And that was someone, Sean, I love him. He had actually been through the recovery process. So this was, when Riz kind of talks about the different roles we played, Sean was really the heart of that character. And all the tattoos you see Riz have, a lot of those are references of Sean's and things like that.
Okay, yeah, totally.
But Sean wasn't really a teacher. So I kind of came in to do those bits. So after that, I didn't know what to expect. Eventually, me and Riz were going to meet. And we rolling the dice, I'm like, I hope this is a very cool guy. And in fact, he was. But ahead of that, I just did some research about other drumming movies. And I've seen them all pretty much. It wasn't like Vision Quest, where there's one high school wrestling movie, right? And that's the only thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I looked at Whiplash, Miles Teller. He worked with Nate Lang, who was also in the movie, but Miles was already a drummer. So
okay.
That was the thing. Funny coincidence, my cousin-in-law, Ben Wilkins, won an Oscar for Best Sound Mixing, ADR, on that movie. Then there was The Big Short. There was that sequence
Christian Bale, yeah, totally.
Yeah. And that was Scott Wittenberg. He was at Musicians Institute, and that was only like 2 weeks that they worked together. But Christian Bale's a method actor, so he was going in character a lot of times, and that I'm like, oh, is that what I'm going to be dealing with? Oh, geez.
Yeah. No, thank you, sir.
No. But if I did, I already said yes.
Yeah, exactly.
There was no coming out. And then another one I loved was That Thing You Do with Tom Everett Scott. That was Billy Ward. so just kind of looking for research of workflows and how they did it and what went on. And but one day Riz walked into my dingy practice space in Brooklyn, which I shared with Tucker Rule at the time. And we sat down. Yeah.
Love Tucker, yeah.
The greatest. He sat down out of the gate. The first thing he said was, he goes, check it out. The last thing I want to do is, shit all over your art and craft. I'm going to put in the work. I want to do this as authentically and as hard as possible. And just know that. And I said, great.
Wow.
So we're off to the races.
Yeah.
So really after that, and we got along great. Like Riz, grew up in London, and we loved all the same music that came out of the UK and are around the same age. So we really bonded over things like drum and bass and grime and, and hip hop and all these things.
Sure.
But from a project standpoint, from a workflow standpoint, I had to figure out a method. And what I did, I had been working in tech, consulting and music tech and stuff for years. And I said, okay, I'm going to look at this like we're building a product, or we're going to ship something, right? Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of stuff that has to get done, and there's a due date. And we got to figure out what happens between start, point A and point Z there. So I started by doing requirements gathering, so I went through the script. I highlighted every scene where there was drumming, and I kind of cataloged it. And everything from where you see in that opening shot where he's tapping on Olivia with the sticks to kind of wake her up, to playing on the buckets at the deaf school, to the performance parts, even the part where you see them playing on the slide where he's tapping. We worked out a part for that. And what I wanted to do and what Riz wanted to do was not only not make this stuff look just kind of haphazard. Little things like how you hold a drumstick. Like we would do things like, this is how you break down a cymbal stand. This is how you carry a drum. All the little things that
sure,
when you go,
absolutely.
When you watch a drumming movie, you're like, ugh, like, eh. Like, so we focused on that. The art directors, the art direction was incredible. If you saw all the bands, like all the minutia there with his shirt, he's in a Youth of Today hoodie. He's, there's Elementary P9 stickers here. So we wanted to take it to that level with the playing. So after that, it was about getting a consensus of what the deliverable was. So what each one of those things should kind of look like, and thinking, talking to Darius and Abraham about what the blocking of the shots would look like, right? So I wanted to see in my mind's eye what they thought that would look like on location and those things. Is this a continuous shot? Is this a two shot? I had worked in film a tiny bit. My aunt had a production company, so I had PA'd and kind of knew enough about this to talk about it. So we got through that. And then you map the scope of work, right? So you say, these are all the things. The performance parts are going to take the longest, just because he has to look like he's playing drums. The other things, that might take a week, that might take a day. We'll get to it. But so I would write out Gantt charts. I don't know if you know what those are. Those kind of, use them in project management for kind of blocking out time and how long you're going to spend. They just look like these bars. It's like a calendar, right? I nerded out. But I was also like, I said I was going to do this, and Riz is all in, and my name's going to be on this. so let's go. And it was really exciting because I was so emotionally invested in this thing. It was so important, and I was taking it to that level, and it just resonated with me. So I wanted to help produce the thing that I wanted to see and what it deserved to be. That's really what it was. Not to say that all the other drumming movies didn't do that, but it's all different, right? And I also wanted to fix the things that I didn't like in other drumming movies to whatever degree.
Amen to that. No, I mean, as drummers, I think we all have the specific music videos or specific movies we can think of where it's like, it's so simple just to make him not hit a snare on 1 and 3. Like, why is it such a freaking difficult thing. Yeah, and then also just not being authentic. I have a disdain for musical movies, probably similarly to you, for the reason that we just like. I get out of the world. I don't believe it. But the three that you mentioned were actually really good movies.
Really good,
yeah.
right? Yeah. There's Thomas Pridgeon actually did this thing for GQ, I think, where he went through and gave his take on all the drumming movies.
I should check that out.
It's super funny. It's really entertaining. Yeah. So after we got kind of through that and kind of scoped it out, and the one thing about the performance parts, like the songs, we were building the plane as we were flying it. So we were kind of writing the score. They had this rough demo of what that first piece would be, but we also had to build it around Riz's technical ability. And I basically said, I'll know how good he'll be in 6 months after 1 month, because that's sort of how learning curves kind of work.
Sure.
Yeah, there'll be some squish. It's never perfect, but so they were starting to work on that, and that was Abraham was working on that. So really the people who I was in touch with, obviously Riz, and that was 3 days a week to begin with, 2 hours a day. And then that, as we went on, it got to 5 days. Sometimes we were working it every day as we got closer, just to kind of really get the finishing grit on the thing. But I really wanted to focus on 3 basic buckets outside of the idiomatic stuff, the deliverables, the things that we had to do. And, my teaching studio, Reflex Labs, it focuses on these things. It's really not idiomatic. And, in our last conversation, you can kind of hear bits of my philosophy and stuff like that.
Sure.
So it's technique, coordination, and conditioning. So one of the most important things for Riz's character and the type of drumming he was doing, it was going to be aggressive, right? It was going to be big. It had to look big. He had to be hitting to really work. So he couldn't hurt himself. That would have been bad. And I think all of us know, all of us who have been on tour, if you get an injury, if you pop a blister, second night, you better get that crazy glue out, and it's not going to be a fun 3 weeks. Kind of getting through that. So conditioning was a big part of that. Riz was already doing 2 hours a day of ASL training, so American Sign Language. Then he would do another hour or two of physical training. You saw the way he looked in that. He looked
great,
jacked, yeah. And then he would show up with me completely exhausted, and we would work for another 2 hours. And we actually had to flip that around sometimes just so he could, kind of focus and play a little more effectively. But yeah, so that's how we were kind of breaking it down. As you saw, Riz is a lefty, and that was a big executive decision we had to make early on, if he was going to play open-handed or if we were going to do what I call the full Collins, which is what we did, right? So he's playing a left-handed kit. It's funny, he's one of those southpaws where he kicks righty, he boxes righty, he writes lefty, and we experimented with it for a while, and then I said, nope, this is it. We could go a million ways, and it's just going to confuse your brain.
Yeah.
But he was great. And so once we started doing that, getting him comfortable, working a lot on grip. Grip is huge, just from the actual technical application to the way it looks, right? How it's aesthetically gonna translate on screen, again, so he doesn't hurt himself. Basic coordination exercises, getting him working. We eventually got him on a double pedal. I'm sure you've heard stories from Chris, maybe here and there, about trying to navigate that, because that's its own universe, let alone getting someone who had played for months, to really get into
or
that
years
stuff.
Like me. I mean, I sit behind a double pedal, and I'm like,
right,
here goes nothing. Yeah.
Me and Abraham and Riz, I sent them, there's this video on YouTube that shows you every kind of blast beat. And
okay.
I was like,
I've missed that one, unfortunately, but
right.
yeah.
I was like, this is the menu. This is really the only one that kind of makes sense. And, but these are the conversations we were having, where we wanted it to make sense sonically, and we were going to be shooting a lot that was just continuous one take stuff. There was going to be some coverage, but we really, that opening scene was really supposed to be, and kind of was in a lot of ways. A lot of it was this continuous thing, not Birdman, style with that, but that was the goal. So the way we worked, Riz was on a lefty kit, acoustic kit. I was just to the right of him on a righty pad kit with silent cymbals, with L80s, right? And then I had a screen, a monitor that was right in front of him at eye level, right? That was kind of like in front of the kick drum. And I was running GrooveScribe. That's Mike Johnston's program where you can kind of author things. Him and Lou Montulli made that. Unbelievable. So
it's really user-friendly.
Incredible. So I would program it from my kit. I would have all these things set up, all these exercises and all these parts broken down, and just feed it to him and then have the audio going through the PA. The cool part about that, or teaching like that to anyone, is that they can see the bouncing ball, right? They can see this notation, this visualization of the beat. They could hear it coming through the PA, and then they could look to me and see what it looks like, the actual physical orchestration of it. But it's not this cacophonous thing where two drum sets are playing and you can't talk over each other. And it's something I thought a lot about, because for teaching for years, where it's just like, oh, this doesn't work. This isn't good experience design, right? Right. So what it enabled me to do was, when he's kind of circling through something, always hearing the rhythm, always hearing the full part, and then I could have him pull something out and just focus on two-way coordination, then add something back in. I could physically get up off of my kit and manipulate his body, right? So if he's struggling with a pedal orchestration, like a foot coordination, I could go down and move his foot, right, physically, while the track is running and he's seeing the thing going, and really encapsulate the whole thing in an efficient way. And it was great. It worked. So that's how we kind of chunked out the parts. Mm-hmm. And while this was happening, Abraham would fly in new versions of that one big piece, which initially was like 7 minutes long. It got cut down to 2 minutes. But we had a 7-minute version. And Riz was actually really upset because he had worked so hard on a bunch of these fills that we put together. They were really cool, and then they were gone. And he's like, it's like I felt so good. You did great, buddy. Yeah. It's like when you're in the session with the producer, you work this thing out in the demo, and they're just like, nah, that is absolutely not gonna.
Any other ideas?
That sounds great. Let's put a pin in that. We're gonna come back, right?
Exactly.
You go out to lunch and Steve Ferrone's there, but
yeah, because I was gonna ask, not to cut you off, but if there were any sort of compromises you had to make, and let's see if I can word this correctly, because there's a difference between having perfect technique and what a drummer should be playing like, and then what people, and you did kind of mention this, but what looks good on screen but is still believable to what a drummer would do. So what was the biggest, I guess, difference in how you would approach a drummer to this is how you should play aggressively, to this will work, this will translate well?
So this is interesting, because if we were to use the band that we were referencing, Jucifer, right? Mm-hmm. Or a lot of these sludge metal, and again, it's all over the place. Some people have incredible technique and can do all these things, but Ruben's character was not a trained drummer, really. He was, he could do all these different things. Like, he was a producer, he made music, he would solder circuit boards and all these things, but he wasn't really trained. So I had to ride the line where it was like, he can't look too good, because then it doesn't suit. It's like we were talking about last time. Do what's appropriate. We say play what feels good. We'll play what's appropriate, and hopefully in the end that's what makes it feel good, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what we were looking to do. There were certain things with the kit, the look, where, and we talked about this a lot, with art department and things like that. He should have a 20-inch, if possible. It shouldn't be any bigger than 22. Riz isn't super tall. He shouldn't look dwarfed behind the kit. The cymbal should be at a certain height, but not too high where it obfuscates, the shot or him. But you know how to ride on a crash cymbal. Like that had to happen. So it had to get up there. So those were the decisions that some of them, we would just have a session where I would just bring the crash of the ride up and down a few inches, and we'd run it to see what it looked like and what it felt like, to that level of minutia. But yeah, there were really the first part was just get through it, just get this deliverable thing. And that was interesting because Darius and Abraham actually asked me if I wanted to write the parts for that piece, and I told them, I'm like, that is not my bag, baby. Like, I will. And we got in and we tried a couple things, and that's not my world, and nor do I claim it to be. It would have been efficient if it was, but Abraham actually called this incredible drummer, Harry Cantwell. He's out in the Bay, played in a lot of death metal bands and stuff like that, and him and Margaret Chartier, Pharmacon. So Margaret was working with Olivia, teaching her all the guitar and screaming stuff. She was kind of like my counterpart in Blackgammon, which is the name of the band. And they worked together to really write that song and along with Abraham to put this thing together. So they did a session, and we finally had a song in parts that I could reverse engineer and bring back. So then the bar was equally raised, but it was easier because there was something there, and we could go, okay, you're never going to be able to play that fill, but we could dumb this down into something cool. There's a form. And that's where the rubber really hit the road, and we started focusing and so I just put that into Ableton, put a bunch of markers, and we just loop sections like you would in any other rehearsal. Or, marching drummers chunking. We were chunking and getting through that. So he'd learn the parts with Group Scribe and me, and then run them like that. And then we would slowly start to take stems out. So the drums would be gone, and then he would be hearing that. He was working with a click. That was very important. So clicking cues, and those went through the end. I was kind of MDing. I was the playback engineer for that. And that was really efficient, and really where we got, it was like 7 months, give or take, all together. The last month, the band finally got in the room, and I have this incredible phone footage at the sweatshop over here, one of the sweatiest, dingiest hourly rehearsal spaces in Brooklyn. And they're a band. They're just doing it. We're running the click, and both of them had ears. That was one thing. So here's another perfect example. These kinds of bands don't really run ears, but it was going to be impossible for them to really do this, from a performance standpoint and from an editing standpoint without a click and cue in their ear. So I remember being on location and talking to the director and the DP and a producer saying, okay, if the script supervisor is here, is there confluence, right? Does this make sense? How do we feel about this? I looked at induction loop technology, right? That's the thing that broadcasters wear. It's like it's this little RF thing, but there's no wires. Like you can't see anything. That wasn't going to work. So we just said, hey, this is what's going to happen. But again, to your point about technique, about playing, there are aesthetic things that we really were looking at, but it wouldn't have happened any other way, and it worked great. So that last month, we cranked those rehearsals out in Brooklyn, and then we went to location. So just to zoom out for a second, before that, Riz walked into one of our lessons, and he's just got this look. And I'm like, what's up? And he's like, the schedule got pushed back. And I'm like, how much? He's like, it's when you're gone. We're going to be shooting principal photography. And I saw him kind of, because I was this blankie, and I was bummed because I was like, no, I got to Obi-Wan this. Like, this really needs to be, I want to be there. I kind of always envisioned it. But in that instant, I just said, it's cool. I got an idea. We're going to figure out, just know you're going to be great. And as soon as that lesson ended, who did I call?
Chris.
The big fat, yep, the man. So I called Chris. I said, hey, dude, you're in Boston. We're shooting in Boston. I'm going to be out. Can we pass the parcel? And he's like, sure, whatever, man. In true Chris fashion. And yeah, we just worked out a few things. I sent him the tunes. And in retrospect, the entire thing from soup to nuts would not have worked without Chris there, because Chris is an incredible drummer. He is a tech, right? Mm-hmm. He knew how to run ears. He set up Olivia's guitar. He knew how to do all these things.
Yep.
And again, yeah, so it was great. And so we landed in Linfield. That's where the production office was, and that's where we were doing a lot of things before they were shooting. And the other thing was we're shooting sequentially. So that means it's like doing your record in the order of the track listing, right?
Yeah.
So all the shots you see, all that shooting happened in order. So the first thing we really did was that shot was that big scene, and that was at TT and the Bears, aka it's known as Sonia's, but those two locations, it was TT's and the Middle East. All those performance things. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Upstairs or downstairs?
Both. There was,
okay.
Yeah, you'll see scenes like that where they're setting up the merch table, all that stuff.
I'll rewatch it knowing that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Like that scene is one of the most eerily familiar, like almost creepy, where you're setting up your merch booth and you just sound checked and you're like, hey man, how's the sound up there? You're like, it's fine.
That's a nightly conversation. Yes.
Yep. Chris and I, we also wound up working with the art department up there because they had that Airstream, and it was full of all this gear that was basically like boat anchors, because it was like ADATs and old boards and things like that, but it had to light up. It had to look like it was working. So me and Chris spent a couple days hooking up iPods to get VU meters to move and things like that. Again, we had a blast. A lot of trips to Guitar Center to buy a lot of silly things. But yeah, and so I had to fly away, and I was in Berlin when they were shooting. So I'm 6-7 hours ahead, and I'm just texting Chris and Abraham, being like, how's it going? And everyone's like, it's good, everything's working, this made sense. And I was like, okay, cool. And I remember we did our first set, and at set break I called, and I was just like, what is going on? Because that would have been in the midst of it. And everyone was just like, they just crushed it. They really did it. And I was so grateful. And, again, I wished I could have been there. But having Chris there was, he was my security blanket at that point. I trusted that he would take it across the finish line, and he did. But, it was funny because we advanced that show, like, to the Middle East, like you advance a show. I sent an input list and a stage plot and everything but a hospitality writer, and that was kind of fun. That was kind of fun to do. But the kit itself, that was Emily Smith she was at Zildjian at the time. Mm-hmm. That was her brother's kit, because we were looking with the art department at what should this be? Should this be a beat up old beater with stickers all over it? Should it be, we looked at Wood and Weather, like they had these vintage kits, and I was like, I don't know if that's aesthetically the thing. And Emily sent me a picture of this kit, and it was like a white Tama, looked like an Art Star, and one of Ruben's biggest influences was Lars, and I just said, that is it, like that's what we're doing. And we got a bunch of big old cymbals. But yeah, that was another big part of it. That, like, making sure we were being true to the character, being true to his story, aesthetically true to all those things. And I remember seeing one review, I think it wasn't in Metal Hammer, but one of another brand facsimile, and they were in. And that was the thing I was the most terrified about, right? It was like, we really were looking for this authenticity, and it got, I don't want to say we got over it. It landed. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that was really it. And then it went into editing for years and went into post-production. And then the pandemic happened. And that was crazy, right? We wanted a theatrical debut. That was difficult. We did it at drive-ins, which was the kind of the stopgap.
Yeah.
But the bonus of having Amazon distribute your movie is that you're on Amazon Prime Video, which was very conducive at the end of the day to a pandemic and everyone being at home. And I don't want to say that it wouldn't have been as successful if that wasn't the case, because I really believe it would have hit an art house theater in the same way it did streaming. But to see the response was just unbelievable. And all my friends, I don't know if you were one of the people who they had to watch it in sections because it was so emotionally draining. And it's like a horror film for drummers, the first 30 minutes.
Yep, that's how I would describe it for sure.
Yeah, but that's kind of the story there. I don't know if you had any other questions in regards to any of the bits and bobs.
No, I just remember Chris, not that he was downplaying it, but I mean, you know Chris. He was like, I worked on this thing, I think it's going to turn out rad, and it was kind of a, he didn't really, he didn't talk it up. He wasn't blowing smoke up his own ass. And so me and my girlfriend were like, well, let's watch it. It came out, and I knew you were involved, and I was like, I have to watch it. And within the first 10 minutes, I was like, oh, this is a good movie. Like, they actually really gave a shit. And I didn't go in with low expectations, but I went in with no expectations. I was like, I want to support my buddies. Yep. And I was like, oh, no, this is an amazing movie. And so you did a great job, because he was so believable, man.
Thank you. That was, I think my favorite part is that opening sequence, and they turned it into part of the trailer, where you see him do that big cymbal crash, and it's this beautiful high molar whip, right? You see it come from his elbow, and you see it come down, and I was like, that looks good. Like, and again, that was the idea, to get the physicality, the emotion, all of that working. And there were parts where you could see he's not a great drummer. He's not supposed to be a great drummer. This isn't Whiplash. We're not going for Buddy Rich, but it all translated in the end. But man, I'm so happy you liked it. I'm obviously thrilled at how it was received overall, and now I just have to wait for more drumming movies to be made so I can get called again, because it is a hoot to work on that stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the way I would describe something like that, it's like a good set designer. If it doesn't pull you away, like if you don't notice it, they're doing a good job. I didn't notice that he wasn't a drummer. I was just like, oh, he's a drummer in the movie. I believe it. And so that means, if they don't know you had to exist, that means you did a great job.
Oh, thank you. That was the goal. That was the whole, if I'm invisible, it's like there's producers who come in and have a sound, right? And your band kind of has that fingerprint on it. And then there's the ones who just make you sound more like you. And that was really my goal there. And again, to fix all the little things that might be tells or take you out of that experience. And now, so I got to call Risley Bear. It's been a minute. We've,
Risley Bear.
It's my guy.
That's awesome.
He's very busy, as you can see. You see him all over the place. But we got to get together and play at some point. He'll never call himself a drummer, but he is a drummer, and he's a very good one. On top of all the other things that he is incredibly good at. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it, man.
Excellent.
I don't even know if this is going to be a bonus episode. I think this could just be, I'm not going to promote it as one. I think this will just be something that people would want to hear. So there we go. And that's the show. Be sure to subscribe. And if you're listening on a platform that allows for ratings or reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, which means the show will get better and bigger, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'd be an OG listener that could brag to all your friends. Anyways, also, why don't you go ahead and check out bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the socials. Just search for @BigFatSnareDrum and you will find it. This show is edited in part using iZotope RX8 audio editor. It's amazing. So go check that out at iZotope.com. Bye.